All right, so today it is my pleasure to have Jennifer White from Bright Futures Families. She's the owner of Bright Bright Futures Families. Very formal. All right, so the first question I have for her, and these questions are a little bit different than what I've been doing in the past, because I actually had the honor of speaking to Jennifer for her podcast. So I got to know her, and so I have a couple of different questions. So please tell us the history of Bright Futures Families and why you started the agency.
Sure. So I guess we'll start with the why we started first, and then I can kind of roll forward from there. So I went through infertility myself. It took us 7 years of the dreaded unexplained infertility, everybody's favorite diagnosis, right? And as we were going through it, my sister, Ellen, was watching us struggle and didn't know kind of what to do. How do you support? How do you help? And she actually decided to become an egg donor. And so she donated eggs. So we didn't need her eggs because we were, again, unexplained, because, they're like, your eggs are good. His sperm is good. You're just nothing. It's just not right.
Yeah.
So she actually donated to a single man. So it was a known donation. And at that time was really unusual to have a known and open donation. But she was a young attorney. She was doing hedge fund law, really, really boring law. But she gets this contract and she's like, this is really cool. This is like the most fascinating, happy law you could ever possibly do. So the child from that donor actually is just barely older than we luckily became pregnant. And I was able to carry. So her donor child is just almost exactly the same age as my child. So fast forward a few years, Ellen grows her own family, moves to Colorado, and decides that she's done with corporate law. She really wants to move over and be in, family law and happy law and do stuff to really help grow families.
Yeah.
And so she decided to open Trackman Law Center. So at the time, she needed a paralegal, and that's what I went to school for, because I'm married to an active duty military member. So I didn't get to go to law school, because if I did, I'd have to move and rebar every single time. And I was like, I just don't want to have to retake the bar over and over and over again. I know myself well enough to know that's just all right. Not that interested in that specifically. So I was a paralegal, so I still got to touch the law, but so I became Ellen's paralegal for Trackman Law Center. We helped families, supported families through generally mostly independent matches. So, but what would happen is a lot of people would come to us and say, hey, I'm here in Colorado. I know I need an attorney. Where do I find a gestational carrier here specifically in Colorado? And we'd go, we don't know. We don't know how to do that.
After you match.
Yeah. So, and that's what we'd be like, we don't know. We only know how to handle the rest of this stuff, at that point. And we did. So we got a lot of experience helping families through. I know law firms don't typically help through that part, but we did, because you do, right? That's just what you do. When you're in this area, people do it out of love, because that's just, you want to see these families grow. You want to see them successful and happy. So at one point I had lived overseas. And so I was doing a lot of this actually from overseas, which was a fun logistics exercise. And I moved back, and Ellen and I talked and said, hey, how can we support and help these families actually find the gestational carrier part? So we decided that we would split out and actually open an agency separate from the law firm. So we took quite a while, 6-ish months. And we talked to every gestational carrier we could find, every parent we could find, every attorney we could find, mental health professionals. We went to every clinic we could find and say, what are the bad things you see, right? How can we avoid the bad things? And also, what are the really good things that you see? So that we could thoughtfully set up an agency and what we were going to do going forward.
Yeah.
Our original intent, to kind of talk about like how we started and all of I know there's a lot of confusion over Bright Futures Families and things like that we originally started as Colorado surrogacy. Our intent was to find Colorado surrogates for Colorado parents to match with Colorado clinics and be a complete local support. we found that's not 100% realistic. I mean, we absolutely, we love those. Those are still our very favorite batches, and we do a lot of those. But we did find that what would happen is a lot of people would be like, I have a Colorado clinic. I really want my gestational carrier to be in Colorado, even though I live in Iowa or wherever they happen to live. And so we realized that we did need to be flexible in who we were willing to help as far as parents go in that way. So we started that way though, and loved it, that we got to support people in Colorado. Most of my team is in Colorado. They're actually based out of Denver. We had a gestational carrier who was an independent match with us through the legal side come to us and say, hey, I see what you guys are doing. I live up here in Montana. Can you guys open a version up here in Montana? So Montana Surrogacy was born. Okay. Because we had somebody on the ground who could support Montana surrogates. And so what we realized, to stay true to what our real intent was, is that we want to support people, the gestational carriers and their process very specifically where they are. Yeah. And so over time, it grew a little more. And we've only ever expanded to places where we have people to support. So we have Colorado Surrogacy, Montana Surrogacy. Ellen and I grew up in New Mexico. So we originally started as New Mexico Surrogacy. We realized that was probably a little short-sighted to only do New Mexico. So it's Southwest Surrogacy now. So we renamed it at that point to kind of get a little bit more of a catchment there. Then we opened New England Surrogacy, Texas Surrogacy, and Pacific Cascade Surrogacy.
Okay, where's Pacific Cascade?
So it's based out of Washington. So it's Washington, Oregon, technically Idaho, and we will take gestational carriers in Northern California. I have to think really hard about it because that's a little bit further outside of what we're used to supporting, quite honestly. So it's usually a very special circumstance if we do that, but generally Washington and Oregon. And I mean, part of that is some of these we couldn't expand to until the laws changed. So we didn't open Pacific Cascade Surrogacy until after the law changed in Washington and allowed surrogacy to be legal there.
Okay. Could you describe, just because you're talking about it, and I didn't ask this before, but I'm sure, can you describe the support? Because when you talk about like you want to be in these certain locations to support the gestational carriers, can you talk about what you provide in terms of support?
Sure. So we have people who are there locally on the ground. So that's in this era of COVID, depending on when somebody is coming back and looking, that may or may not be important at this point.
I think it's important.
And I always understand there's a lot of pushback, all over that people say, well, your agency can be anywhere because you're not going to go there. And it's true that we don't require people to come to our agency. Never do, because we're very individualized to what every person wants as far as their support level. But the thing is that if you do need to go have coffee with your case manager, we want to make sure that that is an option. Or we did pre-COVID have a policy that we had to do our interviews with the gestational carrier in person. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I've had to change that because safety and things like that. But it made it a whole lot easier to know that this person that you are viewing, like, one, it keeps costs down, right? Because we don't have to fly somebody out to go to do an interview with a gestational carrier. But two, when that gestational carrier is seen, this is a person that they can see again and again and again if they need it. So that's just on that bone side of things. But we also provide support with, we actually have a social worker who checks in with everybody at least twice a month. It's not required that you must speak to her, but we have that support there in case you do need it, because there's nothing worse than your first contact with a professional being the moment you're in crisis. It's a whole lot easier to go, oh, hey, you know what? I do know who you were. I recognize your voice. I've talked to you before. Okay, now let me reach back out to you or have that conversation with you now. Mm-hmm. The other thing is we also used to do events in person before COVID, and they were silly events, like we would have like pumpkin decorating or things like that. And those are just more because you want to make sure that people can get together and have that feeling of community through the surrogacy process. Because while parents feel like they're alone through this, and that's one of the hardest things for me because I've been through that. I did feel alone, and I was sure I was alone. We were the only people in the entire world, we were sure of it,
Exactly.
who
Yeah.
couldn't have children. And it's not true. And on the other side, gestational carriers often feel like I'm the only person who's doing this. Who else is doing this? And there's a shared feeling that you want to be able to just get together, even if you don't actually talk about the thing,
Yeah.
you know, the either the infertility or about the fact that you're carrying a child for somebody else. It's the knowing that these people are your same people. So we try to offer things like that for local support as well.
Okay, that's wonderful. And then you were mentioning before that, so it looks like you really want to emphasize like a close relationship between IPs and surrogates, and that's kind of what you originally, and so now, but you're saying that that was kind of hard, and so you will take IPs from different states, and
We will, but we still want to make sure that everybody has a relationship that they want, right? And don't get me wrong, not every intended parent wants a close relationship. Not every surrogate does. But
right.
what we want to do is make sure we match on that compatibility.
Yeah.
And because some surrogacy on the side of the parents, a lot of it, you have to make sure you have some trauma-informed care on there, because definitely there are parents who come from a trauma background and they don't want to know what's going on with a pregnancy because they had so much trauma themselves. And so you want to make sure that you have a gestational carrier who's not going to be like, I need to tell you that the baby kicked today. And as opposed to some parents are like, hey, look, you know what? I was born without a uterus. I have no idea. I never am going to get to experience this. You are my only hope to experience this.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that they're a good match together there. So you can still have that relationship that way, even if you're in another state over or in a different place. It doesn't mean that you have to be able to go out to coffee every day or things like that to have that. I will say one of the things that we do focus more on is we do not tend to do international matches. And it's not because international matches can't also have a good and close relationship. It's just that we do focus more on that domestic, closer, more able to be at things if at all possible relationship.
Okay, wonderful. So tell us about working with your sister now. So we
Yeah,
was very important in you creating the agency, but like, what is the role now?
Yeah, so I mean, we still own the agency together, but I'm the director of the agency, and Ellen actually just runs Trackman Law Center. So it's great that we both have that ability to have our fingers in here, but I do the active management on a day-to-day basis. But it's fantastic to have an attorney to call and ask my questions of every day. So, you know, I mean, Ellen is my biggest cheerleader and I am hers. You know, we absolutely, you know, it's great working with your sister, and I wouldn't change a thing about it. It's just that we tend to we keep them a little bit separate, but we can bounce the ideas off of each other is what it really comes down to.
And you guys are both in Colorado.
I am actually not in Colorado.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, so Ellen is in Colorado. Most of our team is in Colorado, but I am actually in Connecticut. So I touched
okay, I was going to say New Mexico, because before you said you guys are both from New Mexico. Okay.
We did grow up there, and actually my child that we did eventually have was born in New Mexico.
Okay.
I'm married to an active duty military member.
Yes.
And so we go where we're told. And so currently we have been told that we should go to Connecticut, and actually he's retiring here next year. He just announced it.
Okay.
And so we'll live here permanently now. So I actually am in New England. Even before, I would fly back to Denver and work 1 week a month out of there. And I tend to work remotely out of my home office the rest of the time. So changing to working remotely for the pandemic wasn't big of an adjustment for me. What I missed was getting to go into the office from time to time, but we'll get there eventually, right? I'll get to go back.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I like going like once in a while, but not like every day.
Right.
That's a different conversation. But yeah. All right. So the last question, and this is kind of what I always ask, is tell us what makes your agency unique and what sets you apart from the others.
Sure. I mean, I really think our more localized touch is one of the things that sets us apart. we're obviously not the only people who could match local for people. You can go to any agency and say, hey, you know what, I only want a gestational carrier who's local to me. We tend to have a little bit more of a drill down though. It's a little easier for somebody to come to me and say, hey, I really only want a Colorado gestational carrier. And I go, great. Guess what? That's what we do for Colorado surrogacy. So it does make us unique in that way. It also makes us unique from the gestational carrier side in that way too, because some carriers really do only want local parents. And that's great. They can say, hey, I only want Colorado parents. We absolutely match to what people are looking for. And in that regard. So that does make us, I mean, again, not 100% unique, because I'm never going to besmirch another agency, because they definitely, many of them do exactly that, but we are more localized in that way.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. Those are all my questions for today. We appreciate your time.
No worries.